Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our fourth quarter Arts Insider political briefing. The timing couldn't be better to get the right information from our political insiders to inform us what's going on in Washington, D.C. And by the way, it's happening by the minute. They literally are connected to their Twitter feeds, and I still call it Twitter, to their Twitter feeds and other access forms to figure out what's happening. And I'm very pleased for this quarter session to have our Americans for the Arts Action Fund PAC, pardon me, PAC chairman, Lyndon Boozer, who is phenomenal with 40 years experience and a partner at Capitol Council. And joining him is Joe Eannello, who is also a partner at Capitol Council and has multiple years of the appropriations process on Capitol Hill, having worked for an appropriator for many years, but he is now also at Capitol Council. Joe has worked as for Republicans during his career, and Lyndon Boozer has been working for Democrats his career, and that's how they split up their workload as well. So we're going to get perspectives from both sides and also just the facts. So I'm going to start with a Q&A, but I want you to know in the audience that you can ask your question by putting it in the Q&A box, which is on the lower part of your screen. If you hover your mouse over that top part above your taskbar on the lower part of your screen, you'll see it pop up and there will be a Q&A question mark box. We will get to those questions at the latter part of our meeting, but we're committed to giving it at least 10 minutes to take your questions. So what I will be doing is taking your question and reading it out loud. Now, what you might want to do is up the vote of someone who may have, prior to you, asked the question, and it's very similar to a question you asked. Just up the vote because it will go up the scale to make sure those are the questions I'll ask first, instead of trying to figure out who has matching questions. So I encourage you to do that. It's very effective to get your questions asked. Okay, with that, I am going to start with the first question to Lyndon Boozer. So, Lyndon, Congress is making a lot of headlines, not just over the last few days, but over the last few minutes, constant updates and headline updates of what's going on with a very controversial continuing resolution. And I hope you'll explain to folks what that means, attempting to prevent a government shutdown. Can you give us more details of what's going on? The latest version of the CR that I think is only less than an hour old, but you've already kind of know what's going on. And why didn't the previous ones that were attempted to be passed didn't go through?
Well, Nina, thanks for having me. Thank all of you for taking the time to listen to us. We appreciate it very much. As PAC chairman, the first thing I also want to do is thank those of you who support the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. It's very important to support legislators, Republicans and Democrats, who support the arts. It's a passion of mine, Joe's. We have clients in the arts space. And so, Nina, thank you for allowing us to pontificate on this ever-changing Rubik's Cube on steroids, because that's really what it is. We have these new factors with the president-elect, Elon Musk, who really is responsible for tanking the most recent agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans that Mike Johnson, the Speaker, had very carefully crafted, and I think did a really balanced job and had the support of Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic leadership. But after his tweet on all the goodies for Democrats, the president-elect weighed in and also desired a debt limit increase. And essentially, the original agreement was pulled. It was never voted on. And they came up with a second continuing resolution. Basically, continuing resolution is another way to say punt. Punt till next year. Let's just kick the can down the road and we'll deal with this later after we can get through the holidays. Now, the speaker is a very religious individual, and I think doesn't want to celebrate Christmas, as most of these legislators do, and the Hanukkah holidays as well. And so I think they really want to get out of town. I do know that for a fact. But after this second proposal came up with the debt ceiling increase, less of the Democratic goodies, very few of them, in fact. Um, it was taken to the floor for a vote on suspension, they call it, which requires two-thirds of the members in the Congress to vote for, and it failed. It failed miserably. Only two Democrats, I think, supported it. One voted present, but most of the Democrats voted against it. 38 Republicans voted against it. And so even though the president-elect supported it, so it's a little bit of an embarrassment for the president-elect to say, hey, stick in my debt ceiling. Let's get rid of all these Democratic favors that Elon Musk and I oppose. Let's leave a few items in there, like disaster relief and maybe extension of the farm bill. And let's take it to a vote. And because I endorsed this bill, it should pass. Well, it didn't pass. So back to the drawing board. Now, Joe Eannello has worked in the trenches as a former legislative staffer for Congressman Kevin Yoder. He heads up our appropriations practice. I'm going to let him get into what could happen in this third iteration. But basically, this is what they call Plan C. This is the next bite at the apple here to try to finish the job. And, it's actually a pretty simple proposal. Three different votes, a clean continuing resolution, that's one vote, a farm bill extension, that's the second vote, and a third vote on disaster relief. Now, each of those votes separately really ought to pass. I mean, who doesn't love their farmers? Who doesn't want to support disaster relief, particularly since those affect a lot of Republican voters? You look at the disasters in North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, all Republican states. Each of these bills should pass. Now, has Hakeem Jeffries come out and said, vote your conscience, Democrats, vote however you want? I'm not opposed to this item. I'm glad it doesn't have the debt ceiling increase in it, and I can actually live with each of those three votes. I think that may be what he says. He may say, listen, members, vote how you want to vote. If you want to support the farm bill extension for another year, which kind of keeps the numbers the same, vote for it. If you want to support disaster relief for these poor states that incur all these natural disasters, vote for it. If you want to vote for a clean CR, vote for it. But we don't know that. And they're huddling right now, the Democrats, to figure out how they're going to respond to this. President-elect Trump has not weighed in on this yet. Who knows what he's going to say? And I'm hoping they kind of keep, the co-president, Elon Musk, at bay here because, President Trump was elected. He and J.D. Vance were elected. Elon Musk wasn't elected, but he's clearly had influence on this process. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Joe, since I can't give you an answer, Nina, on whether the Democrats are for this or against it. But I will tell you this: the margins in the House are the closest they've been since the 30s. I mean, right now, Matt Gaetz is no longer a member of Congress, and so the numbers stand at 219 Republicans to 215 Democrats. Next year, several of those Republicans are going to go into the administration. That's going to take that 219 number down to 218, 217, 216. We're going to have a 216 number of Republicans to 215 Democrats. That's a one-seat margin. That's unbelievable. So you don't think you're going to need Democratic votes to support passage of legislation when you have a lot of budget hawks on the Republican side? You have a lot of, basically everyone in the Republican caucus now can be a Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema, which held up a lot of bills in the Senate on the Democratic side. So these tight margins are what's playing into this situation here. And that's why Mike Johnson has to focus on not only getting reelected speaker, placating the president-elect, but also trying to keep the government functioning, because that's their responsibility, and they're in the majority. So I've probably gone on longer than I should have, but I did want folks to kind of get the lay of the land. And with that, Joe, I don't know what your thoughts are on this and whether this will succeed or not, but you would know better than me because it's your people in charge.
I would love to make the prediction, Lyndon, but as anything is proven, this political theater we're watching is not predictable. We've seen over and over again, a deal appears to be negotiated, it gets the blessing, and then suddenly, the rug is pulled out from it on the first deal. The second deal, has the blessing. There's a truth. How about that for a social media platform that says success in Washington from the president last night endorsing the plan, and it loses 30 something Republicans? These are not just the Republicans who are of the Freedom Caucus persuasion. This is sort of some mainstream Republicans lost in that deal too, and most of them attribute it to the question of debt limit. What they're going to try to do later today is a CR, and essentially a CR, like Lyndon said, is to punt. It's to extend last year's funding. So a CR to extend as is the funding that we have now through March 14th, plus what Lyndon mentioned about agriculture and disaster relief. Put that all together into the mix, and you lose the debt limit provisions. Depending on if the Democratic caucus is able to support that, we could very much see that bill go over to the Senate. Now, as Lyndon pointed out, you need a two-thirds majority. Even that vote that happened last night, plus the debt limit, didn't make it to a simple majority. So, we're in uncharted waters. We don't know where we're headed next. But we do know, or we've heard, so to speak, because it's not official, that there'll be a vote somewhere around 5 p.m. today, unless things fall apart. I think if members catch wind that it's not going to be a swimming vote, then that'll be what it is. They might have to go back to Plan D at this point. It's all possible. Um, so we couldn't be more in the 11th hour either. I mean, just to emphasize, I think everyone's been watching this and we've watched it unfold over the course of the past 3 or 4 days. But to not have a plan that's sort of agreed upon by all the parties to be voted on when you're 8 hours away from the end of the fiscal, sort of extension that happened last at the end of the day today, it's just sort of not much time to work with. And, even if things were going really smoothly, agencies or whatnot need to be making accommodations for that. So I don't want to dwell on that any longer. I want to give it back to Nina to keep this an interesting conversation. But more to come. I will say one more thing. I did want to say one more thing. I was thinking, and I think we all were as we were planning this discussion, how to think prospectively, how to think about what's going to happen next year, right? So this is the question that's in the back of all of our minds. What fate will the arts face? What fate will any appropriation, that's reliant on federal government and Congress making a decision, be faced? And, you know, we thought we'd have time to have that conversation, but we're still worried about last year. And even if this goes perfectly well today, it'll extend through March 14th, which means that we'll be worried about last year and the new year all at the same time when we get to March. So, complicated picture ahead of us. To say anything perspective, it's to say, look at the outside influence, non-traditional social media, the influence of Elon, Doge, etc. It's not to be underestimated. And I think it's proven that self out here over the past few days. So I'm going to give it back to Nina to keep this conversation going.
So this has prompted me to ask a lot of questions, and it can go to both of you, or if only one of you want to answer. But let's just start with the continuing resolution, which we call CR here. It has dropped the debt limit extension. Can you explain why Trump thought that adding a debt ceiling to this bill would be accepted by a Democratic majority Senate and President Biden, who is a Democrat? Why did they think that that's even possible?
Let me go first on this one, Lena. So there's two schools of thought in DC right now. Is this request from Trump that they sort of do away with the statutory debt limit? That's what's written into law on how much we can borrow as a nation. His request was to suspend that through January of 2027, 2 years, and notably after his first midterm election. So, you know, that deal, that piece has now fallen out of this discussion. It's not part of this next vote that we think that they'll be taking, not that we can be certain how they'll go. At that, the last extension was set to expire on January 1st, 2025. Now, that's not a precise date because there's some leeway with respect to the statutory debt limit that allows the Treasury Department to take what they call extraordinary measures to make adjustments in the way that money is moved around to accommodate paying our debt so we don't default. So that date is probably more like June, July of 2025 that this would be, um, coming up as an issue. I think if you look at that, you can see pretty quickly that it would be sort of a fly in the ointment for a very busy, ambitious legislative year that President Trump is looking to have. There's a discussion about doing energy policy, immigration policy, overhauling the tax code, revitalizing the economy. There is a political continuum of people, and I think sort of you even saw this with Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat from Massachusetts, saying that she agreed with President Trump that we should permanently get rid of the debt limit as a legislative function. Her concept there is that legislation by hostage takings, which she literally said in her tweet, is not a great thing. I think the president-elect, is worried that he could get taken hostage come whatever date that might be in June or July. If there's even the slightest amount of threat that we default on our debt as a nation, our credit rating as a nation can go down. The economy takes a massive, swing in the wrong direction. If he wants to be defined as the economy president, he can see that coming. Additionally, he knows it will be a major, major vulnerability for him in terms of negotiations. That the price for getting Democratic votes to extend the debt limit clearly will be very high. It was demonstrated just yesterday in this vote. So to say what happens next, we don't necessarily know. He was hoping to get it off the table. It's something he's hinted at over the course of months, but he never made such a strong push until just now. And, Lyndon, I'm sure that you have some insight onto, sort of what Democrats might want in exchange for helping him out when that deadline comes around. But I think it'll be probably pretty steep.
You're on
Oh,
mute,
you got
Lyndon.
to mute, Lyndon.
Is this better?
Yes.
Democrats, I think, also want to be recognized, and they're typically, regarded as, pro-government, pro-spending, and less fiscally responsible. But, I do believe they do want to pay their bills, and they do believe in higher taxes to pay their bills, and they don't believe in deficits that are out of control. And so I think they would probably prefer to have a backstop, on additional tax cuts. And I think the goal of these tax cuts expire in 25, and one of the goals of the administration is to extend them, and they cost money. Couple that with Doge and cutting spending, but it's tough to cut spending when most of the budget is defense and entitlements. I mean, I think it's at least three quarters, kind of, estimating there, but there's not a lot to cut. This whole waste and abuse category there just isn't enough money there. So I think Democrats, probably agree that it's an artificial barrier, but they're probably split. The moderates and the centrists probably, prefer to have a backstop like debt ceiling to vote on. But obviously Mr. Trump doesn't want that because, these legislative priorities are going to cost money and probably, increase the deficit. And so I think that's why he was trying to slip this in, but clearly it didn't sit well, even with his own caucus.
That's
38
right.
Republicans voted against it. So, what's in the Nina is what's in the budget for the arts in
Yeah.
2025? Is it 207 million? I know it's an important number.
Yeah. So, in terms of first, I'm going to answer what's in the continuing resolution. By definition, that means level fund. Every agency is set at level funding to the previous year. And so that means 207 million, no cuts. And that applies to the arts education program as well, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Institute, Museum, and Library Services. But then you're asking, so what is coming up, what if this were truly an appropriations bill instead of just a continuing resolution, what numbers had been put in? And the Senate had put in a small increase for 211. There was a small decrease on the House side, but Chairman Simpson has already assured the arts community and me personally that he is going to go with that higher Senate number for 211 if they actually do an appropriations bill.
What will they do in March, Joe? Once we get to March, do they kick the March CR to the end of the year and the arts gets 211 million, and then the new budget comes out for 26? Because as we all know, the State of the Union occurs just before the president presents his budget, and then the Congress does its appropriations for 2026, which will be, March, April, May. And then we sort of start this all over again. We try to get it done by the fiscal year, which begins October 1. It never gets done by then. And that's why we're kind of still here in La La Land in December, for a fiscal year that started, 3 months ago, October 1. We're still dealing with those numbers. But Joe, can you give the
Sure.
audience an idea of what to expect for 2025, which is what that's what the CR is all about in
Yeah.
March?
Yeah, fiscal year 2025, I'm sure folks are in tune with this if they're tracking appropriations, has already begun, right? It began October 1st. So that's what they're working through now.
Of
I would
2024 for an FY25 bill.
Yeah, yeah. What what I'm what I'm getting at, I guess, with the core answer to what Lyndon is asking is that we don't know in March. There will be a new Congress in place. We think, and we have commitments from existing appropriators, sort of, to work to Nina's respect to get that Senate recommendation. But that's just their draft bill right now. So right now we have this extension of funding that's carried forward at the end of last year's fiscal year, funding level. We don't know if they'll choose to continue to do further CRs. They certainly could in March. We hope not. I think that one of the big sort of daggers about the way that they've approached even this CR is that they took all this effort to negotiate a pretty significant bipartisan deal, meaning House Republicans, Democrats, et cetera, who were all on board, it seemed. Um, but it was lacking in finishing out the fiscal year. So things like annual appropriations will still be, left and, sitting out there in March 14th. If that's when this CR or whatever they get to, we'll still have to make another push to finish off this year. Not to mention, we'll already be working on the next year. So it's going to be quite an ordeal there. We think if they come to a negotiated agreement, if they do something other than a year-long CR, they'll probably go the direction of that Senate number, but you can't know for sure. You'll have a new cast of characters, a Republican House, albeit with a very small majority, a Republican Senate with new leadership. Um, it's gonna
White
be a
House
different
Republican.
world.
It reminds me,
Oh,
go ahead, Nina.
Joe, you mentioned that it could be a further extension of the CR, maybe for the rest of the fiscal year for the appropriations for federal agencies and programs. Um, if that were to happen, can you talk a little bit about what the pros and cons are of something like that happening?
Sure, you that's not the most obvious pathway to go forward. It's very hard to finish out an appropriations year with a full year CR. And there's a lot of different reasons. Most of it is because there's so many different constituencies who are harmed by that. The defense community, for example, would be probably pretty outspoken and opposed to a full year CR.
For what
You know,
reason?
the reason that is based on sort of the dysfunction of government when you're operating under, stops and starts type budgeting. You can't get into contracts with people. They're interrupted. It costs more to operate under a CR as a result because of the stops and starts that you might have under contracting purposes. Entities know that and are charging more of the federal government for a standard service, right? So, spinning up the production lines for some sort of vehicle is not something you can turn off one day, turn on the next day, turn off one day. So it presents all kinds of problems. There will be a contingency of people who we can't necessarily say where they would be on the arts, but that care about that specific issue in the Republican Party that would be pretty mainstream, that would probably not be there to support a full year CR. So some careful negotiating would have to happen. And if you look at the CR negotiations that's happened so far this week, it sort of leads you to think they're going to have to rely on Democratic votes, at least in the House, probably in the Senate as well, to come to some sort of final agreement. So um, they'll test the waters here throughout the rest of these deadlines this week, and maybe they'll learn a lesson or two on how to negotiate a bipartisan agreement and get that pulled off in March.
Yeah, and for some arts organizations that secured a pledge of an earmark from the Senate because the House was not accepting earmarks from nonprofits, and specifically arts nonprofits, but really all nonprofits. So anyone who had an earmark that was going to go into the omnibus would no longer get those earmarks that were promised to them and legislated through their appropriate committees. So that would be a big loss. But also, it means those kinds of agencies like the Department of Education, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting would not be chopped as what's being talked about on Fox News by the heads of Doge, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, that they want to eliminate and kill these agencies. Their funding would be guaranteed at least for the rest of the FY25 fiscal year through September 30th. Lyndon, I'm going to hand it back to you. You wanted to add some comments as well.
No, I was really just going to say it reminds me of that quote from the movie that Emma Thompson produced Last Christmas, based on a lot of George Michael's songwriting and music, which we live in dark times. These are perilous moments. I want to open it up to questions from these 195 participants who live daily, the arts, because that's why we're here. We're here for them. And so people in Washington love to hear themselves speak, including myself. But I really do want to ask you, Nina, to see what others have to say. I mean, you asked me, I think, before the call, what's going on with the Democratic Senate and Joe Biden? And I'll just tell you, in short, not a lot. They're not really relevant here, mainly because the margins in the House are so tight. Basically, that's why the House is leading here, because that's going to be the tough nut to crack. If you can get it through the House, the Senate presumably would swallow it, as they say, and accept it. They tend to be, sort of the higher upper chamber, I don't want to say the more mature body, but they love to call themselves the adults in the room. So you could expect, if we get this through a 2-3 seat House margin, that the Senate will probably, accept it and vote it unamended, and then get it to the president to sign, because the government will shut down most likely at midnight tonight, and we're going to have a shutdown over the weekend. And I think we've done that before, and it's really not nearly as draconian as if it's during the week as it is the weekend. But it is brinksmanship to some extent. And going into the holidays here, I do think members want to get back to their families and their constituents. So anyway.
So I am going to ask this question, but just based on what you just said, this bill was broken up into three bills. So three bills have to pass, really. And based on my congressional experience, you add those kind of bills that everybody can get behind, emergency supplemental for those fire disasters, water disasters throughout the country, the farm bill and farm jobs. Those are typically what's added to create more votes for a larger bill that's controversial. What is the advantage of turning it into three bills? Does it help Republicans or does it help Democrats?
Well, the votes can be separate, and members can vote differently on each one.
But
So,
does that mean they'll all pass?
well, probably, I mean, based on my experience, if some members don't like CRs, period. They will probably vote, some of these Republicans wouldn't vote for a continuing resolution. Shut the government down.
Right.
But you'd have enough Democrats offset that because the Democrats want to keep the government open. You'd have a lot of Republicans support, a lot of Democrats support it, offset the Republicans who don't. Same on the farm bill. I mean, who doesn't want to support their farmers? So generally, you'd probably get a lot of, but when you put it all into one big fat package like a Christmas tree, then it can be, sink of its own weight. And, that's a little bit what happened on the first bill when Elon Musk said, this is a giveaway to the Democrats. There's lots of, pork in here. They're giving authority to DC on the RFK Stadium. They're fixing the bridge in Baltimore. They're, reforming pharmacy benefit managers in terms of, the drug pricing. So there's lots of other extraneous items that, frankly, Democrats wanted as a price to support the bill that all got dropped. And so, sort of the Christmas tree sunk from its own weight. And so then they came up with Plan B, which we discussed already. And this is kind of Plan C, and it's not cooked yet. I mean, I think this is kind of what we're hearing from our
Yeah.
sources. But
Let
go
me
ahead.
jump in on that for a second there,
Yeah.
Lyndon. I don't even think to be not to throw cold water on the question because I think it's a good question. They might end up just unifying the three bills and just taking a single vote on it. That might still be the plan that they take. It's not locked in. It's both of those ideas have been put forth. So first and foremost, the origin of this is a request from some of the most conservative Republicans. What they've asked for consistently from their leadership is something called single subject bills. They want to vote on single subject bills. They just sort of despise the notion of what Lyndon's talking about. Well, you force members to, eat a terrible bill because their one little thing is in there. Their district got hit by a hurricane. Consequently, they're going to have to vote for something else, that has nothing to do with that at all because it's in the package. Otherwise, their political opponent will say to them, "Hey, you voted against, bailing out your own constituents. What are you doing?" Right? So that's the essence of this. It is if they end up breaking them into three separate pieces, they're trying to allow members to have a more sort of discrete I am for the disaster spending, but I'm not for a continuing resolution. I am for, they're allowed members to sort of split that up in the theory being that, enough votes would be there for all three of those things to be passed, but some people would be able to take a walk on something like a CR.
So I'm going to take the first question from the audience, and it's one that I believe I answered, but I'm going to make sure. And it's from Bridget, who asks, "What is the current CR regarding NEA?" And it is 207 million, the exact amount that they were given to use last year, because all agencies are level funded in a continuing resolution. But I have to say that this is a bill, if it passed today, that's only going to take them to March, which is 6 months of the fiscal year. And there's got to be a reason why President-elect Trump wanted this bill to be punted, because it was already conferenced in the House between Republicans and Democrats. I think, Joe, you might be able to confirm that, and that it was ready to go. But Trump weighed in and he said he wanted it to go and not get resolved in December, but move to March. And the dark side of my mind goes to thinking, well, it's because they want to influence how the rest of the funding goes for those agencies.
Yeah.
I think it could be very negative. Joe?
Yeah. The how so both chambers acted on the interior bill where the National Endowment for the Arts funding comes from. The House passed it on the floor by a vote of 210 to 205. So pretty decent little margin there, considering this, the majority being the size it is. Um, the Senate did not pass any of their legislation on the floor, but that's typical. The Senate and House set their conference negotiations up by passing the bills as far as they can, and then usually members will get together and they negotiate at end of year. spending deal. So that's been acted on at the for the next year. However, we're still stuck in this CR world. So um, why does the president want it to be in March? I think to exert further influence on the bill. I think you got the right read. Um, Two scenarios. One could be, the Doge people have at it and they just go through and they just say all these things that we don't like need to be cut, need to be eliminated, etc. That'll be really tough to get through, as we've already discussed about sort of the bipartisan majority or that will be needed to advance these things. And the other scenario is he can use that as a negotiation point for something else. What else might he want? Something to do with immigration, for example, or something that doesn't even touch us. But knowing that it'll take a significant margin to get this bill through Congress, that might be why he wants it in March 14th.
So our next question is asking something that we've touched on, and that is, what do you know already? And it's probably for you, Joe, because it's really about what the new incoming Republican administration is going to do about funding support for the arts and culture and humanities and things like that. Um, once they get into office, once they submit their first budget, probably late March or April, um, anything that you have your ear to the ground that would know something like that?
It's hard to say for starters. I think we can assume, a certain uh, look at how we're highlighting sort of the Department of Government Efficiencies, so to speak. So an agency has been so elevated. It's the central to all national news that we're talking about government shutdown, and their, mission in life is to eliminate spending, eliminate what they consider to be wasteful government programs. So up in the air where you think that will go. The Office of Management and Budget is staffing up. That's the, at its core, sort of the appropriations arm of the executive branch, with some fairly conservative names in place to take over. And those people, I think, will act largely as an arm of Doge to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks, right? If there's a recommendation to eliminate spending, they're going to influence what the president publishes in his budget, and we'll see that come to fruition. Have they established a funding line item for us, or have they even gotten to the point where they'd be thinking about that? I can't say just yet, but I would. It's right to assume that they will take a pretty conservative spin on what we're getting after, and will
And
take
during the
significant
first,
advocacy for us to
yeah,
defend.
during the first Trump administration, let's call that Trump light now, uh, he was zeroing out funding for the NEA and NEH all 4 years of his
Mhm.
administration. So it's not going to get worse than that. But what we had is a more moderate Republican base that created a very strong bipartisan support for the arts in Congress. I feel that moderate GOP support um, is definitely still there, but 8 years later, it's moved further to the right. Um, and so while I think overall we have the bipartisan support for Congress to reverse a zero budget request, I just think it's going to be harder to get them
You,
to there with this.
Yep.
what you have now that you didn't have then, but you did have last Congress, is an even tighter margin. I mean, the margins have gotten so tight that House Democrats are actually somewhat relevant.
Yeah.
We're seeing that play out now. So while the administration, and I've answered, by the way, several of the questions that were in the chat, I've tried to
Great.
send a few, quick, tight responses there. And Joe, you should feel free to do
Yeah, I'll
this.
check that out. I hadn't been
If,
doing that sort of high tech
well,
version here.
I have
Got it.
ADHD, so it's multitasking while you guys are talking. But so you get to a one-seat margin after these three Republicans go into the administration, which is going to happen. They've already agreed to go serve in the new administration. They're leaving Congress, so bye bye, Miss American Pie. So Don McLean, for those of you who are old enough to remember that classic song. Um, and Joe may even remember it too because he's quite a traditionalist. Um, I think that it's not till second quarter of next year that you fill those seats. Am I right, Joe? I mean, what's the timeline to fill these vacancies, including Gates, who resigned?
There'll be the Republican vacancies in Florida that are for Gates, who of course was appointed, but then sort of got unappointed, and then Waltz to be, I believe it's national security advisor to the president. Um, those two won't get filled until April 1st. April 1st is the special election in Florida. There's one further Republican that's going in the Trump administration. That's Elise Stefanik from New York's 21st congressional district. That's the North Country, as they call it, upstate along the Canadian border. She'll go to be the UN ambassador on behalf of the Trump administration. Now, she's still elected to Congress and is still a member of Congress, and I believe will be sworn in for next Congress. It's just not quite clear on, when she leaves that seat to go take that on. So that's kind of up in the air at the moment. But
Would
we,
she have to have a special election too? No appointment by governor, right?
I believe that's right. Yeah, I believe they'll have to have a special election. I just don't know when that is. There's probably a little bit of strategy too, but not just surrounding her own appointment on when she might resign in order for someone to go on take on that seat. So TBD there, but at least we know it's going to be until April before they can refill those Florida seats.
Let me try to get
Right.
a couple more questions in. Um, the first version of the CR, which had a lot more funding things that created a 1,500-page document,
Yeah.
um, included something called the Ticket Act. Um, is that in the current version? I'm pretty sure it's not
No,
the clean
no.
CR.
So that was part of a sort of the legislative package deal sweeteners along the end. There was healthcare So what we're looking at now, as we've said a couple times, is just a date extension to March 14th, some agriculture relief funding, a farm bill extension, and debt and disaster relief, right? Um, there were all of those provisions plus a bunch of deal sweeteners. So things to do with healthcare policy, things like the Ticket Act, that sort of addressed bots and that sort of notion of people trying to snipe your tickets to come to your venue or whatnot, and then reselling them on a gray market or whatnot. So those provisions have fallen out. Now, I'll make one observation for you. They met the level of vetting necessary to get into a leadership negotiated deal, right? So if you like the Ticket Act or you like some other policy that was in that original CR, you can be sort of heartened by the idea that um, leadership looked at it, decided it was go time. It was ready for prime time to be included in a major legislative package. Now the political, winds kind of swept up all those provisions, but probably easier to come back if you were already included once than it would be to go somewhere else, right? To create a new piece of legislation and
Something
get into a deal.
important to know, though, is that the authentic tickets community, arts, sports, the primary presenters are against having that particular ticket act in the CR. I want to let you know
Oh,
that
very good.
so that you can keep your eye on it for us, because
Indeed.
it created loopholes for things like Vivid Seats and
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so that they could still do the things that they're
Well, then take my notes as a warning then, because I would say that it's been discussed at the highest levels of Congress already. So thankful and get after sort of advocating and making sure they understand that the next time it were to pop up.
yeah. So we're hoping Senator Cornyn and Senator Klobuchar will share their voices on this. They're the infamous duo who helped with the SVOG funding and legislation, and they're also behind a much better Ticket Act. So want to just let you know that. Okay, so here's a question for Lyndon, and that is, doesn't the president have to still sign these CRs and bills like that? What role is he playing? We don't hear his voice.
Lyndon, are
I
you having technical? Oh.
yeah, no, I just responded to that in writing.
Okay, I think everyone else wants to hear though, because
Well,
they,
no, I will tell you, yes, to answer your question, he has to sign the bill into law. Is he engaged in these negotiations? No. And this is a fundamental negotiation between Hakeem Jeffries and his leadership in the Democratic caucus, and Mike Johnson, the Speaker, and his caucus, and frankly, the president-elect and his advisors, like Mr. Musk. So right now, every different bill or issue involves different various players. Uh, because of the margins in the House that are so tight, and that's the toughest threshold is the House. They are trying to get to, yes, I think both sides, Hakeem and the Speaker. But the president has not been involved in these negotiations. His people haven't been either, because at the end of the day, the person who delivers the votes in the House on the Democratic side is Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And so he is handling, he wasn't involved, frankly, the House wasn't involved in some of the previous negotiations, right, Joe? I mean, I forget which negotiation it was. I think it may have even been the last CR. That really wasn't a House play. It was a White House play. So every time you have one of these negotiations, it kind of boils down to, which chamber it has to go through. Typically, the House goes first, and kind of who has the leverage. And in this case, Biden lost the Electoral College, the popular vote. The administration, I should say Harris, because she was on the ticket, but Biden Harris lost. So they don't have a lot of leverage. They've got, till January 20th, and then they're out the door. So the leverage is of the president-elect, you know, and, Hakeem Jeffries has leverage. You know why? Because the Democrats picked up a seat. They picked up a seat from the last Congress. So before they had 214 Democrats, now they have 215. They flipped California 13. Duarte lost to Adam Gray. That was a flip. We picked that up. Now we lost, some seats in North Carolina, but we picked up seats in New York and California. But net, Democrats picked up a seat. The Senate obviously lost seats, four. They lost four seats with Pennsylvania, with Montana and Ohio, West Virginia. So they lost, those four states. They
Pennsylvania.
outperformed, yeah, they outperformed Harris and the Democratic ticket in the other four races in Arizona, with Gallego winning, even though Trump won Arizona. Jackie Rosen, Nevada, even though Trump won Nevada. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, even though Trump won Wisconsin. And Melissa Slotnick in Michigan, even though Trump won Michigan. So, so now you have a 53-47 Senate with the Republicans in charge, when before you had a 51-49 Democratic Senate. So who has the leverage in the Senate? There were Senate Republicans, because they're coming in, with a three-seat margin plus the vice president, if it's ever a tie vote with J.D. Vance. So, that's just the reality of politics. It's extremely fluid. It's extremely unpredictable, and hopefully, it functions, because we have elections every 2 years. People elect their leaders, and we depend on them to keep our government functioning. And we're at that point today and tomorrow, when we see if America the beautiful, land of the home, the free of the brave, can continue being a leader in the world, and a model to others, with its economy and with its freedom. So I don't want to sound like I'm on my soapbox here, but
Get another question.
time will tell. Time will tell. And as they say, the fat lady is probably on stage clearing her throat. She hasn't sung yet, but she's on stage. The curtain's about to be pulled, and we'll hear a nice soprano. Hopefully, probably in the next 24 hours is my prediction.
Yeah. So here's a fun question from Martha. She says lots of chatter, rumor about, she calls him Elmo, but she means Elon Musk, but she says Elmo Tusk, becoming Speaker of the House as second in line to the presidency. Doesn't the Speaker have to be a natural born U.S. citizen?
I don't think I don't think the speaker has to be a member of Congress, right, Joe? That's kind of one of the little
He
But
dark.
definitely
does
does
he have
not
a
have to be a
U.S.
member of
constitution?
Congress. But I guess the question is, don't you have to be a natural born citizen in order to be elevated to the presidency? And then consequently, wouldn't you have to assume that the Speaker of the House would also have to be? I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm not sure. I wish I knew the answer to that and I could
I
just
don't, yeah, I don't
rip it
think
off
that's
for you.
real. I don't think that's realistic. That's like what we like to call noise in DC, like elimination
Yeah,
of all these agencies and departments. I answered a question. A lot of this is just noise, and it's not really realistic. And that to me is,
yeah.
would Elon Musk want that? No. You don't think he's having a ball whispering in the ear of the president and getting his way, making money, launching rockets, building cars.
It
You
wouldn't
know,
be it wouldn't be his thing. No, I would entirely noise, I believe. And you need look no further back than the last time we had a bunch of speaker votes on the floor during the taking the gavel from Kevin McCarthy when Donald Trump himself was receiving votes to be Speaker of the House. So there are from time to time people who have creative ideas. If they select someone other than Mike Johnson after this negotiation, it's bound to be someone in Congress unless something is totally different has changed. But for now, that's where they'll head.
as we wrap up, I did want to give Joe my gratitude for actually representing an arts client.
Oh,
Joe,
thank you.
can you give your
Yeah,
client a shout out here? I don't know if they're on the call or not, but hopefully they
I did give them a heads up about it. Thank you, Lyndon. I'm proud to represent MIFA is what we call ourselves, the Massachusetts International Festival of the Arts. We're working on this exceptional project in Holyoke, Massachusetts, to rebuild what's called the Victory Theater, which is a theater that was really in its prime time up until about the 70s, and which has fallen on some hard times as a result of the economic downturn in that area. There's a tremendous vision to rebuild that, and we're working, as probably many of you are, to try to bring strength to the arts and get funding for this really project will be super vibrant for that community. Absolutely top tier Broadway type traveling shows would appear there. Symphonic music, just exceptional stuff. So we're working hard on that. We're going to be looking for our own earmark for those guys, and I wish absolutely everyone luck making the very important push for the National Endowment for the Arts in this coming year. It will be tough, but your advocacy really does matter, and with your earmarks as well, it's going to be a tough scenario. We didn't really get into that too much, but um, they're still there. They're still keeping the program for now, but we have a tough environment where anything that some people perceive to not be hard infrastructure, basically, is not looked at in a favorable way. So we have a tough environment, but keep doing what you're doing. I think you guys have an awesome mission here, and I'm proud to have joined the call.
And thank you for providing us wonderful advice and guidance. I'm going to leave us with one fun kind of question. Since this continuing resolution, at least, and the other two bills, have to be passed by the House, passed by the Senate in an identical manner, and signed by the White House by midnight tonight, what does your eight ball tell us of how long the government will be shut down for, and when will this finally get resolved? Joe?
They're scrambling to get this deal together. It's clear the House is not giving up on this. House Republicans don't want to be blamed for it. It looks very bad for them going into a trifecta government, all Republican. They want to get it fixed. We'll see what kind of rabbit they can pull out of their hat, what kind of Christmas miracle. It should be known to everybody on this call, as long as there's not somebody ready to block it, you can do a unanimous agreement to do a CR. Not for this big of a CR, but for a day or two. So I could imagine if it looks like Democrats are at the table and they trust that their Republican counterparts are negotiating with them in a fair way, we might see something like that happen and the government might not shut down.
Okay.
If it does shut down, I can't promise how long that will be. I think to Lyndon's point, members, there's this notion of jet fumes. People start to vote for things they wouldn't otherwise vote for if they couldn't, the urgency to get on the runway to get home for Christmas. Think about what it means for families to sort of be separated as they're trying to figure out this type of negotiation. So I'll just point that out. We don't know how long it will go if it does shut down. If it's only over the weekend, to Lyndon's point, agencies usually sort of can not have a tremendous impact, but we'll see what happens. Um, I don't predict a shutdown that goes all the way to January 20th, as some people have said so far, but we'll see. Depending how 5 o'clock goes, we'll have a new prediction for you. So
Well,
wish
and
everybody luck.
yeah, the inauguration is at stake. I mean, that has to be paid for, right? The government pays a lot on the presidential inauguration. So at some point, you sort of have to call the bluff here and sort of put your swords down and decide in the spirit of the holidays to, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and keep the government functioning, take care of the farmers, take care of disaster relief, and call it a day, and then punt again until March. So that's why I think we'll get something done over the weekend. But I'm always a glass half full person and believe that, to every cloud, there's a silver lining and hopefully at some point a rainbow.
Thank you very much. And we didn't get to every single question, but we did a good job in getting multiple answered, more than half. So thank you, everybody. Happy holidays, and we'll see you in the beginning of the new year. Thank you.